Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Hi, Micah. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Let's see. Let me make you co-host. All right. I'm picking up my daughter today from the airport, and so I'll need to drop off for a week. But you're a host, so you should be okay.
Great.
All right, let's just give everybody a couple of minutes. Wow, it's unbelievable. We're almost done with the semester. Wow.
I know, it's crazy.
A year. Yeah, I don't have quiz 7 just ready just yet. I'm tweaking it a little bit before I make it available. Quiz 5 is not showing on Canvas. Let's take a look. All right, I think it's 7 o'clock. I think we have a fair amount of folks, and some more will join in as we go along. So again, yeah, we have Micah here. Going to talk some more about privacy and ethics and all that good stuff. I only talk about the what, and she talks about the why and if we should do it, do certain things, and just show you how to do things. But everything needs to have its context, and Micah will give you context. Awesome, thank you, Micah.
Great. So yeah, quick correction. It's pronounced Mika. So
Mika.
Yeah, people mispronounce it all the time, but and you guys, if you ever see me in the halls or whatever, and you want to say hi, feel free to just call me Mika. Okay, so for today, I'll go over the agenda in a second, but I will give you a heads up that there's going to be 3 different activities that are going to involve breaking out into discussion groups and taking notes in a Google document together. And so the point of these activities is actually to prepare you for the homework assignments. I mean, in addition to just giving you a chance to think through the concepts more thoroughly. But in terms of the assignments for undergrads, there's going to be 1 assignment, which is submitted with your final project, in which you write up a privacy policy. So we're going to do a practice privacy policy today. And for the graduate students, you're doing the privacy policy, I believe, in addition to some VSD, value sensitive design. We'll go over that today. Analysis for your final project, and that will also be due the day that your final project is submitted. So anyway, just to give you a heads up, there's going to be activities and they're all meant to prepare you for these assignments, which I will post on Canvas tonight in both the graduate section and the undergrad section. Okay, where are we now? Okay, so here we are again. We have a little bit to wrap up for the first part of this ethics module concerning privacy. And then we will move on to part 2, which has to do with dark patterns, nudging, and autonomy. But actually, okay, there's quite a bit to cover today. So in the part 1, we will review a little bit of Nissenbaum's account of privacy as contextual integrity, and then you'll break out into groups to do a little bit of analysis of a hypothetical website. And then in part 2, we'll talk about the ethical concerns regarding nudging and dark patterns insofar as they're implemented on websites. And we'll have some discussion. And then I'm going to give you some basics of value sensitive design. So here's where you really want to listen up, because we're going to go through the stakeholder analysis, which you're all going to be asked to do in your assignments. And we'll have another short little activity where in your groups, you'll do stakeholder analysis of the hypothetical website that you talked about in activity 1. And then at the very end, we will just do a run through of what's expected in a privacy policy. And you'll get together in the same group and do an imaginary privacy policy for the website that you came up with for activity 1. Okay, so where are we here? I wanted to start it off really quick just to hopefully get some voices into the mix besides my own. So here's just a question to throw out there. I'm sure many of you have heard there's a popular proposal that given that companies like Facebook and other social media websites make massive amounts of money off of our personal data. One suggestion is that users should be financially compensated. It's our data, and so they should pay us for it. So I'm curious, what do you guys think? Like, given the topics that we discussed last week, last week, do you think that this is a good solution, and why or why not? There's no right or wrong answer here. It's just a matter of providing your reasoning for your thoughts.
I think we just add transparency to the whole thing, and then you can make decisions about the ethical part of it, and then you can put some objective or subjective, I guess, value on something, and say, okay, then it means, well, is this worth $50,000, $100,000, $1 million? And then you can say, well, okay, then now I can. I guess it's all subjective. It's all subjective.
So yeah, okay, good. So we could add some transparency in here about what exactly is going to be done with the data, and then people can decide how much money they think it's worth, and maybe have negotiations about that. What are some other considerations? Is anybody in support of this?
I mean, it's already out there. No, I mean, they're already making money out of it. Might as well make something back.
Okay, so Yang says, yes, we deserve money. Our data is out there anyway, might as well get paid for it. I'd say it's a very idealistic goal, says Marco. I agree. So a lot of people are in support of it. Yeah, a lot of people are in support of this. Does anybody want to raise a concern about it? Given things that we talked about last week, given what they do with our data, it shouldn't be for sale.
Hi.
Hi.
I want to add something. I'm actually against for financially compensated because if they will pay me, they will do whatever they want. So I like my privacy, and I'm actually being more concerned about my data rather than being financially compensated. So I'm against.
Yeah, great. So there is something about once you submit something like privacy to a financial transaction, once somebody has bought it, they've bought it. And maybe there's some sort of terms about what they can do with it that could be built in there, but there is something to be said to support your point of by subjecting it to a financial transaction. It does kind of, you release it completely from your control, and they can do what they want with it. Does anybody have any other thoughts?
Well, it would be a little more like when you work for someone, they're buying your time, and it doesn't mean that they can ask you to do whatever they want. There's a negotiation on what kinds of jobs I'm willing to take, and what's my time worth to me or to my employer, and I can decide to go elsewhere. So this would create a marketplace, right, where and there might be many folks that might be competing for my time, and folks might be competing for the quality of the data, of the quality of time that I might provide others, and just like you could go into a contract with an employer that has a particular time, and it's my decision, and I could quit anytime. So saying, it's something similar to this, where there are contracts, and I own you for the next 2 months or something, whatever. I own you time because you're my employer, and if we break contract, I either fire you or I quit or whatever. So there would be, I imagine, similar, a marketplace, not for time, but for data.
Yeah, so I think that there's something there as well with the marketplace. I mean, it might incentivize companies to really build and invest in trust relations with the people who use them, in hopes to get more people and eventually more data, and making competition in that way. And maybe people will be more protective with data because they're competing with other platforms. So the one objection I just want to throw out there, not as a ringer, not as something that undermines this particular argument, but just like a complication to the situation, is the one thing that we talked about quite a bit on Thursday was what's being done with this personal data, and it's being used to influence our behavior. So oftentimes we think about data as like these little pieces of property of ours, right? And so it's ours, so someone should pay us for it because it's our piece of property in some weird way, right? But when you start to think about what they're doing with that data, that means that when they're paying you money for your data, they're paying money to basically influence your behavior, which changes the question a bit for some people. And when you're no longer thinking about it as property, but allowing someone to pay you money so that they can influence you through whatever sort of personalized nudging or advertising that they might throw your way. So that's just a complication that I was hoping to draw out, but like really great points brought up here. Okay, so to remind us of the privacy as contextual integrity. So this is Helen Nissenbaum's suggestion for how we might think about privacy as a lot of our offline lives are moving onto online contexts. And she points out that the vast majority of social contexts have informational norms. What is an informational norm? It specifies the actors, people who are giving information, the recipients of that information, the type of information being exchanged, transmission principles of that information. So what sort of constraints might be on what sort of information is appropriate or when it's appropriate. And these norms can be entrenched or flexible depending on the context. So we talked before about the medical context, the norms are a bit more entrenched there than say a family context. A family context, the norms are oftentimes up for negotiation by the particular family. Um, Informational norms should support contextual values, she suggests. So whatever sort of informational norms are in play in, say, the medical context, should support the value of, say, health or healing, or whatever sort of values we think are operative in the medical environment. And so we can understand privacy in this more dynamic way as a violation of the informational norms. So when the flow of information is not appropriate according to the norms at play in a particular context. So I kind of just laid out this example when I was talking, but the classic example that's often given in the contextual integrity talks or discussions and literature is the doctor visit. What information can be exchanged, details about your body, your history, your eating habits, other sorts of habits that might impact your health, your routines, etc. Who's giving the information? You're giving the information. Who's receiving it? The doctor. Transmission principle, and possibly, the nurses and people behind the scene that are organizing your information for medical purposes. The transmission principle would be that the information should remain confidential. So there would be a violation of privacy if the doctor went home and posted it on her Twitter. And another principle at play here is it's appropriate for the doctor to ask the questions, but if you were to turn around and start asking the doctor questions about their body or their routines, it would be a violation of the flow of information there. The contextual values in a medical context are alleviating pain, promoting health, maybe cultivating a trusting relationship. So her suggestion then is, as we start to move a lot of our offline life onto online contexts, we need to consider whether or not the informational norms that govern the offline context are being preserved in the right sort of ways in the online context. So example, Mayo Clinic. So she suggests first we should look for precedent in the offline context. So we'll look at, in this case, a medical context, and look at Mayo Clinic as a health clinic. And then we ask, does this technology and its informational norms promote the contextual values for that particular context? So does the website promote health in some way? Do its information sharing practices promote health? And then how can this technology best be used by individuals and society? What informational norms would support that? So for example, would you look up a piece of health information on this website if you knew that it was going to become public in some way, either posted on a Facebook wall or what have you, trackable by people besides medical professionals? Should this website have social plugins? Should it have a social feed? Those sorts of questions you want to ask and think through with it, thinking about what the contextual values of a medical context are, and what are the informational norms that are appropriate to support those contextual values. Okay, so for your first activity, okay, in the chat, it would be one of the first or second lines, but it comes from me, Mika Mignani. There is a link to a Google document. And I have the instructions for all 3 activities in that Google document. So what's going to happen is I'm going to walk through this activity in a second. But once you are split into breakout rooms, you're going to take that Google document, cut and paste it into your own Google document so that you as a group can sit and take notes and answer the questions. Okay, so for this first activity, imagine you're making a website in one of the following 4 categories. So a shopping website like Amazon, a finance website like PayPal or a bank, a social website like Facebook or Match.com, news, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc. And then I want you to answer the following questions and discuss them together. So what informational norms govern this context in offline settings? So the shopping setting or the finance setting or the dating setting. And what are the contextual values that are operative in that offline setting? And then second, what data does an operator of such a website have access to? And what might this data reveal about its subjects? So remember, we talked about data inference and data mining as a way of it's not just the information that the user is aware that they're giving away. It can also be information that is inferred from that data. And then third, what norms ought to govern the collection of the data on this website, given the contextual values at play in the offline setting? And here's some questions to think through there. What data is reasonable to collect? what is reasonable to do with this data, and who is it reasonable to share the data with. So I'm going to break you into groups for 5 minutes, and then we're going to debrief the activity, and then we will move forward. Stop share. Does anybody have any questions before I break you out into groups? I'm going to do 6 to 7 participants per room. Okay. I will see you in 4 minutes. I'll send the little warning and then I'll call you all back. So Jose, are you going out of town for the holiday?
No, I have my daughter's flying from LA and another daughter's flying from Ecuador.
Oh, nice.
And so yeah, no, we're just staying home. My in-laws are coming nearby, and they live nearby, so.
Nice. Yeah, I guess this is the first. This is kind of like the first holiday that travel's been open in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, last Saturday we had my birthday party, the first one in 2 years, where
Wow.
we went all out. So it was a lot of fun,
Cool.
a lot of dancing, a lot of it was having another my friend's mom also was having her birthday. It was she was 91, so we had a big birthday party for both of us.
Nice.
We hadn't seen each other in like 2 years.
Wow. Wow.
With all this COVID, nobody wants us to go out. It was good. Hopefully we'll do something similar in the New Year's. I usually have these huge parties.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh
Hopefully
man.
we'll do the same thing. I don't know, because winter is always iffy.
Yeah, with everything being indoors.
Yeah, COVID tends to, looks like it's seasonal. And it just goes in and out with the season.
Yeah.
I'm worried maybe the middle of winter will be huge spikes. Nobody will want to go see anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
How about you?
I am driving out to Rochester, New York to see a couple of friends. But yeah, over the December, January break, I'll go back to Oregon to see my uncle. Yeah, I have a pretty small family, so no big parties, but yeah, it'll be good to just be with family and friends back home.
Oh, sorry. Where's the link for the Google Doc again?
It's up at the very top. It says Ella Jin to everyone is the first message, and this is the chat. And then mine says Mika to everyone for activities today. Can you see it, Alvin?
I think I joined right after you sent that message, so I
Oh.
can't.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I think someone mentioned it was password protected, but I didn't have the link, so I couldn't check.
Here, I'm sending it to you in a direct message. Actually, I could have
Okay.
just sent it to everybody in case someone else has your problem as well. So I actually have it where there's no editing, just because everybody would be editing it at the same time. And so the instruction was to cut and paste it into your own Google Docs so that people can work on it.
Got it. I'll go ahead and go back to the breakout room and share this out. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I'll tell them it's going to close soon.
Yeah. How do you pronounce your second? Is that your last name? Magnani?
Magnani. So it's Italian. So the G.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I
mhm.
thought.
We have 50 seconds to return. The Google Doc is password protected. Wait, so did anybody see it?
No, we didn't.
Okay, so I made the Google Doc so that it was viewable but not editable. Was anybody like not able to see it at all? Okay, from the silence, I'm gonna guess that everybody was able to at least see it, even though they could not edit it. Okay, okay, so what did you guys come up with? Anybody, like what category you ended up picking?
I think some of us joined the class late, so we couldn't see the document.
Okay, was anybody able to, in the breakout room, come up with a website? Okay, for those, so can you guys access the document? And not,
Yeah, I just checked and it's password protected.
okay,
You
Yeah,
need
we
access.
can't access it. Yeah.
give me 1 second then.
You can request access.
Okay. This should work. Sorry about that, you guys. So maybe we should just do one of these on the fly then, in the interest of time. So let's say you had picked a social website like Facebook. What do you think that the contextual values are there? What's the function of the website and what are the contextual values?
Sorry, which one did you choose? Facebook?
Mm-hmm.
Facebook has values?
Well, but let's like take Facebook's own agenda out of it. Let's just be like, when people enter onto that website, what are they wanting to do?
Generally, they'll you want to either see what your friends are posting, see potentially what some pages that you're following have posted or updated, maybe watch videos that are interesting to you, or start a group based off of something.
Yeah, great. So it seems like the function of the website is one, to foster friendships and to stay in touch with friends. Another might be it's evolved to be a lot of people's source of news. So it's started to function like a news website. And it also maybe some sort of value of entertainment, like being able to watch these little video clips that they now have all over. Okay, great. So if that's the function, then what do you think that like the contextual values might be? So you could take friendship offline, away from Facebook. What do you think some of the values are there? So I think what Nissenbaum would have us do is she would want us to, if a lot of people know, I think, was it Marco who brought up all these different uses that people have for Facebook? So if it turned out to be a website that was primarily people were entering onto it to foster friendships, Nissenbaum's analysis would go like this. You would look at friendship in an offline setting, and you would think through what are the values structuring that particular practice. Maybe it's intimacy, maybe it's trust, maybe there's all these values that you can come up with that are in the offline context. And then you think about, okay, now that it's switched online and people are carrying out their friendships in the online environment, are those contextual values still present? And then, sorry, to go back to the offline context, thinking about what sort of informational norms are at play there, ones that support those particular values. So fostering intimacy, it might be something like a lot of times with your friends, if they share personal information with you, you don't go and announce it to the world because you want to create a safe space in which they're feel safe, sharing and exploring their ideas with you. And that's one way to create intimacy. And so what Nissenbaum would have us do is be like, okay, that's what the informational norm is. It looks like in offline friendship. And how is that playing out in the online context now? And is the way that that Facebook is dealing with the data that it's collecting and the information it's collecting, is it violating these sorts of norms in a way that is frustrating the values that govern the fostering of friendship? So that would be the way that her analysis would go. And to get more into the details, you'd really want to think through, okay, what kind of data does Facebook have? What do they do with that data? And how does that promote or hinder the fostering of friendships? So that is how the contextual integrity analysis is run through. This will be important for your papers, or not your papers, your assignments, because one of the things is you're going to do is to think about a good privacy policy for your website for your final project. And one of the things that you want to consider is what sort of information is reasonable to be shared or collected, given whatever that website is doing and what sort of values it's promoting. Okay. Did anybody want to share or think through another case? If not, we can move on, but I want to open it up in case anybody has questions or thoughts. Okay, but we all have access to the document now. That's good. Okay, so we're talking about privacy in a web development class because web developers have a lot of say in what sort of information gets collected from their users and what's done with that data. So it's important to be critical and reflective on issues concerning privacy and what we're going to do with personal data. What are the appropriate uses of personal data? Another thing to be considered, insofar as one is a web developer, is the different ways in which you can design a website to influence human behavior. And we'll go through the different ways, strategies that people use, but amongst these are dark patterns and nudging. Okay, so some examples. So consider here, the user is being asked, would you like a cookie? And it says a bit about cookies and what they're used for. Please specify which types of data we can collect to give you the best experience on our website. And it gives you the impression by looking at those that in order for it to collect information about my preferences, statistics for marketing purposes, I have to click those. And then the blue button, if I don't read it closely, I would think, well, I didn't click any of them. I can just click this blue button and move on, and it won't collect my data having to do with those things. But if you read closely, the blue button actually says select all and continue. So this is a way of kind of playing with the actions and activities of your users in a way to get them to do what you want them to do if you're trying to collect all that sorts of data. Okay, here's another case, a bit more subtle. So this is for Facebook. So some user says, I want to remove my city from my profile. And then before removing the city from the profile, it says, are you sure you want to remove this city from your profile? And not only does it ask them again, which might be a good thing so that people don't make mistakes or accidentally do things, it highlights the cancel in blue, giving a subconscious nudge that that's the correct option, is to cancel. So that's a more subtle way, but it does influence user behavior. Here's another thing. So someone is not logging into Duolingo to learn their Italian. And so they get a nudge from Duolingo that says, language bird is crying. Learn Italian today or he will eat a poison loaf of bread. The next email will be a funeral evite. So maybe not problematic, maybe kind of cute, makes you smile, but like this is persuasion at work. This is like trying to get people back on their website. Here, do not uncheck this box if you wish to be contacted via email about product updates, special offers, and pricing. I had to read this like 4 times before I understood what it was saying. So intentionally making the text very hard to parse for people. Even here, so this looks like just a straightforward listing of a mixer or blender, whatever it is. But the placement of everything here is intentional for the people who are designing the website. And so one thing that we'll talk a bit about is people are very influenced by what other people think. And so it's very strategic to next to a product to put the reviews for the product. And especially if they're high reviews. It'll make people much more likely to trust in that product, maybe for good reason, but it is a strategic placement of something in order to influence purchasing behavior. Okay, so first we're going to start off with dark patterns. So who can tell me what a dark pattern is? I'm sure you've heard of them.
So dark patterns are website design choices that are meant to either confuse users or mislead users in a way so that it puts them in a position where they're making a decision that they wouldn't normally make would they know the full consequences of that decision. So one other example would be, for example, Amazon makes it really, really hard to cancel your account. It's locked behind like multiple pages of subdirectories before you can actually find out how to do it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so introducing lots of friction to make it difficult for the user to perform the action that they want to perform is a great example. So great, so you basically got the definition. Fully correct. So dark patterns are user interface design choices that benefit an online service by coercing, steering, or deceiving users into making decisions that, if fully informed and capable of selecting alternatives, they might not make. So some examples here, and you can find lots of examples on darkpatterns.org, it's run by the person who actually coined the term dark patterns, Harry Brignall. And I'm just going to list a few, but there's more examples on there if you're curious. So one he calls the Roach Motel, which is it's easy to get in, but hard to get out. So this often happens with subscriptions. So with Ticketmaster, apparently sneaks a subscription into your basket when you're checking out with the tickets, and will like throw in, a magazine subscription or something. And that's another type of dark pattern, is like sneaking things into your basket without you realizing it. One that you have to opt out of, so you're automatically enrolling in it. If you realize too late that you've purchased the subscription and you don't want it, the only way to get a rebate is to download a form, print it out, hard copy, fill it out with a pen, put it in an envelope with a stamp, and send it back to them via snail mail. So that's quite a bit of time investment once you figure out what exactly you need to do to get the rebate. So it's easy to get into that subscription, and it's hard to get out by introducing all sorts of friction. Another one is misdirection. So sneaking something in, like let's say a seat upgrade before someone like checks out with a ticket. Now that would be, again, sneaking something in without somebody noticing it. But then if you use graphics or the layout of the buttons or whatever in order to divert someone's attention away from it so that they don't see it, would be a misdirection dark pattern. Confirm sharing, we saw this with the Duolingo, which was super cute, but you can imagine, all sorts of ways in which a website might shame people for making the choices that they do. So, for example, if you opt out of making a voluntary donation, it says, "Are you sure you don't want to help the starving children?" Something like that. Now, maybe in that case, that's like an ethically permissible one, all things considered or whatever, but things can be worded in such a way as to shame the user to take one action over another. Forced continuity, so free trial, the free trial ends, we're all familiar with this, and they still have your credit card and they silently keep charging your credit card while the subscription continues, even though you may have forgotten you even had the subscription. He also calls privacy Zuckering, named after Zuckerberg. You're tricked into sharing more information about yourself than you would have otherwise. So I'm curious, why do you guys think these seem ethically problematic? Or a more pointed question is, do they seem equally problematic from the perspective of ethics or morality or what we owe to other people as users?
Well, to a certain degree, they're all intended to kind of maybe not explicitly, but they all have the intention to somehow harm users, to either get more out of them or force something that might not be the case where the dark pattern's not there. So on like a perspective of intention, they all kind of stray away from an ethical perspective.
Okay, good. So yeah, one consideration might be harms. So like, let's say, it keeps charging your credit card, like it's taking money from you for a service that you in many cases are not continuing to use because you've forgotten you have it. So that would be a case, and pushing the agenda of the person, who's ever put this design feature in place. It's pushing the agenda of someone else and not your own. And yet another thing is that it seems to be undermining free choice, right? Like you're making a choice that you want to govern your own life. And it seems to be actively going against that, trying to override your choices when they're at odds with what the website wants you to do. So in this, when you look at it from this perspective, the big moral value at stake here is, and I'm sure many of you have heard of it, autonomy. So at first glance, autonomy is the value and the capacity that we have to think and choose for ourselves, to govern our own lives, and it's a capacity that we have. And certain moral theories think that people are owed certain things insofar as they have this capacity. So we owe it to one another to respect each other's choices and to govern their own lives and their ability to think for themselves. There's a more robust way of understanding autonomy that's related, and that is to be self-governing isn't just in the moment to choose for yourself or to think for yourself, but to be the author of your own life. So deciding who you want to be, what sort of values you want to structure your life by, are all a part of autonomy. So some questions we might ask if we're thinking through whether or not a website is respecting the autonomy of users is a particular design feature respecting a user's ability to choose for herself? In many of these cases, not so much. Does the design feature respect the user's capacity to author her own life in accordance with her own values? Or is it introducing friction in a way that's at odds with the values that she wants to structure her life by? And yeah, is it helping or hindering her ability to realize her own goals for herself? So when we have this value out on the table, the things that are not okay from their perspective of respecting the autonomy of other people, well, first, coercion. Because if you're going to respect someone else's ability to choose for themselves and to author their own life, if you force them to do something by twisting their arm, throwing them in the trunk of your car, and whatever, you are not respecting their ability to choose where what they want to do, where they want to go, the person they want to be. So coercion is out if you're going to respect people's autonomy. Another thing that's out is deception. Can anybody guess why deception would be out?
Well, if someone is trying to make a choice, if they're not properly informed, then they don't know, or they wouldn't really be able to make the right choice.
Yeah,
Or the best choice for them.
Yeah, fantastic. So what good is having the capacity to make choices if you're given false information? Because then your choices are based on bad information, and so they're not going to have the result that you were hoping that they would. So great. Yeah, when we actively deceive others, we're not respecting their capacity for choice. And then connected to this, and we talked about this a bit last week, is consent. So if you're going to subject another person to a particular action, or you're going to take their personal data or whatever, a way to respect their autonomy or their capacity for choice is to get their consent, and so that they willfully come along with whatever your agenda is. Okay. So when it comes to the dark patterns we've talked about, some of these are clearly going to be problematic from these perspectives of coercion. Oops, where are these? And deception. So any sort of case where there's kind of like an intent to deceive the person or to give them faulty information here, like, let's go back here. This seems to be a case where at least you're intending to confuse the person, right? Which may not be full-on deception, but you are trying to play with their agency in a certain way by hoping that they read it in the wrong way, basically. This seems to be clearly not respecting their choice in terms of it sets up a situation in which in most cases by hitting that blue button, that means you haven't opted into any of those, but then it switches it on you. Right, so anytime that somebody's choices are being coerced in a certain direction or they're being given deceptive information, is going to be problematic from the perspective of autonomy. But we seem to still have cases like the Duolingo, which it's like, it's influencing us in certain ways. Maybe it's not problematic, maybe it is. Or this one, is it really deceptive? I mean, maybe it's going in that direction. It's not coercive because you can still hit the other button. And so when we get into these vague territories, it can be helpful to start to think about nudging, which is a much more vague area than a lot of the dark patterns. Okay, where am I on here? Okay, so some background with nudging. And these cases of digital nudging are going to be much more borderline cases than a lot of the dark patterns, just because with the dark patterns, a lot of them you can say that they're intentionally trying to trick you, they're trying to deceive you, they're trying to coerce your action in one direction or another. But with nudging, which is a concept at the core of behavioral economics, which I'll talk a bit about in a second. Basically, the way that you try to influence someone is not by coercing them, not by deceiving them, and not by introducing any economic incentives, but rather you alter what they call the choice architecture in a way that alters people's behavior or responses to that choice architecture in a predictable way. And you do so without forbidding any options and without changing the economic incentives. So what is choice architecture? Choice architecture is just the environment in which a decision is made. So here are some great cases of nudging. So here you have urinals, and this started in Amsterdam. Apparently a problem in the men's bathroom is that things get a little messy. And so in order to nudge behavior, they started painting little flies to help with aiming practices. And it made a huge, huge difference. So that's a case you're not coercing people. You're not all of a sudden, taxing a messy bathroom or, handing out tickets or whatever. You're just changing the decision environment in a small way to influence behavior. Here's a case with the Winnie the Pooh. Now this isn't possibly, it may not intentionally be set up, but it functions like a nudge where you see Piglet being shamed by everybody else. Everybody else is wearing a mask. And so it's nudging Piglet to put on his mask. He's still as free as he was before. There's no economic incentives. But the fact that everybody else is doing it nudges him to put his on. So a really important feature of nudges is that it's still, people don't have to, they can reject the influence of the nudge. So you can, pee in whatever direction you want. You don't have to put on the mask, but there's something about the decision environment that nudges you one direction or another. Here we have on fast food menus, the listing of different calories for different objects, making you stop and think, how many calories or what's the nutritional facts having to do with my choices here. And it will nudge people's decisions, often opting for the healthier options. We also here have these disturbing graphics put on cigarettes. People are still as free as they were before to buy cigarettes. However, these advertisements have an effect on whether or not people choose to buy them. And then up here, we have a case of digital nudging, which for Facebook, and this has had a big impact on turnout, on voter turnout, just by putting information about, where the voting, where your voting center is, or information about the election up on the top of the news feed increases voter turnout. And what really increases voter turnout is when you have that list of your friends at the top who have voted. So as we know, when voting time comes around and you can opt to have it say, to announce that you voted, it influences your friends' voting behavior. Okay. So this came, like I said, it's at the core of behavioral economics. So nudge theory is, so it used to be the case with classic economic theory that there was a lot of assumptions made about human beings. One was that they're perfectly rational. They always maximize their self-interest. They have excellent memory, excellent willpower, and that they're unbiased. But surprise, surprise, actual studies of human behavior and judgments show that actual human beings are irrational. They often act against their own best interest. They have limited memory. They're weak-willed, and they're extremely biased. So what was interesting, though, about all these studies that they found was that the irrationalities and the mistakes and our fallible nature, it wasn't random. You could actually predict the way that people would decide or behave, even if they were manifesting some sort of irrationality or biased way of thinking, which led to this dual processing theory way of thinking about the mind. So many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow book. It was very influential, but the theory there that has now been taken up in all sorts of places is that when we make judgments, there's two parts of the mind working together. So one, we have the automatic part of the brain, and I'm sure you guys are aware of Homer. Homer is not a great representative for this part of the brain, and I'll explain why, but he's often used. So he's instinctual, he's emotional, he doesn't think a whole lot before he acts. And then over here, does anybody know who this is, who I have represented for system 2?
Isn't it Chidi from The Good Place?
Yeah. And so what's Chidi like, Laura?
He's considerate to the point of insanity.
Yeah. He's considerate, and every single choice he makes, he has to weigh all the options, all the reasons to come to the most reasoned, rule-governed choice that he can arrive at to the point of it being painful and him being paralyzed in inaction most of the time. So system 1, it's fast thinking, it's associative, most of it's unconscious, skilled, effortless, uncontrolled, and intuitive. And the system 2 part of the brain is the deliberative, conscious. It's very slow. It takes a lot of cognitive energy. It's conscious. It's rule following, logical, rational. Okay. But we are very limited beings. You might think we should be, trying to be more like Chidi all the time. Well, I think Chidi himself, as wonderful of a character as he is an example of why we may not want to be deliberative beings all the time. However, the fact of the matter is we just don't have the cognitive energy and time to run every single decision we need to make through the deliberative part of our mind. So we have to rely a lot on the automatic system. And the automatic system, and this is why I was saying Homer Simpson isn't really the best representative for it, is actually much more sophisticated than Homer seems to be. So we have all sorts of rules of thumb or heuristics and biases that get offered up from the automatic system. So remember, the automatic system, it's intuitive, it's not really conscious, but a lot of our informational processing is happening right there and following all these different, what behavioral scientists have determined to be like rules of thumb or different sort of heuristics that are present. And then this automatic system offers these up for us, and they guide a lot of our behavior and our reasoning. So I'm going to give you some examples of these. So as you'll see in the nudge literature, also in behavioral science, they divide these into like the heuristics and biases, the heuristics or the rules of thumb, which are listed as like anchoring, availability, representativeness. We'll talk about those quickly. And then all sorts of biases and tendencies that people have. I would say the academic rigor in terms of like distinguishing these from one another can be a little lax, but it's a helpful perspective to think about how we respond to the world. Okay, so a couple of examples of these. One is anchoring. So the anchoring heuristic. We have a tendency to rely on the first piece of information received before making a decision. And it's oftentimes a very arbitrary piece of information, and it'll have a big impact on the decision that we end up making. So the example that you can find on Wikipedia is a study by Tversky and Kahneman, who I just mentioned. Participants observed a roulette wheel that was predetermined to stop on either 10 or 65. Participants were then asked to guess the percentage of the United Nations that were African nations. Participants whose wheel stopped on 10 guessed lower values, 25% on average, than participants whose wheel stopped at 65, and they all guessed 45% on average. So the pattern has held in other experiments for a wide variety of different subjects for estimation. It looks like our reasoning and our judgment is being determined by these kind of arbitrary environmental features, and there's consistency in these results. Okay, so another one is the availability heuristic. So tendency to make judgments about the likelihood of an event based on how easily an example or instance or case comes to mind, like what you just read about in the newspaper or something. So in the aftermath of an earthquake, purchases of new earthquake insurance policies rise sharply, but purchases decline steadily from that point as vivid memories recede. If floods have not occurred in the immediate past, people who live on floodplains are far less likely to purchase insurance, and people who know someone who has experienced a flood are more likely to buy flood insurance for themselves, regardless of the flood risk they actually face. So here you can see where these irrationalities are coming through. You would think, and according to old economic man, we always act in our best interest. Well, for people who live on floodplains, it's in their best interest to buy insurance. But there is this irrationality that is observed across groups of people, leading them to posit that there's some sort of psychological tendency or bias that we have, which is the availability bias. Okay, representativeness heuristic, estimating the likelihood of something by comparing it to an existing prototype or stereotype that already exists in the mind. So this is a fun example. Linda is 31, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Then people were asked to rank, in order of the probability of their occurrence, 8 possible futures for Linda, this imaginary person. The 2 crucial answers were bank teller and bank teller and active in the feminist movement. Most people said that Linda was less likely to be a bank teller than to be a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. But this is an obvious logical mistake. So here's an irrationality, but a consistently predictable one in people. It is, of course, not logically possible for any two events to be more likely than one of them alone. So just to show you, look at this Venn diagram here. So you have all the bank tellers in this big circle, and then only a small subset of them are bank tellers and women who are active in the feminist movement. So of course, it's more likely that she's going to be a bank teller, just mathematically speaking, than she is to be in this smaller subset of that bigger group. And yet, because of the representativeness bias, people seem to often answer bank teller or feminist bank teller. Okay, so there's just a whole, so those were the three heuristics. In terms of the biases and the tendencies, you can like go online to like Decision Lab, or I think one's called WellMind, but just type in list of cognitive biases and you'll find just hundreds of them that people are working on trying to discover. But I'll list a couple here. So the framing effect, logically equivalent information is sometimes treated significantly differently depending on how it's presented. So here's an example. Lyft hired a consulting firm to figure out how to encourage more driving during the platform's busiest hours. At the time, Lyft drivers could voluntarily sign up in advance for shifts. The consultants devised an experiment in which the company showed one group of inexperienced drivers how much more they would make by moving from a slow period like Tuesday morning to a busy time like Friday night, about $15 more per hour. For another group, Lyft reversed the calculation, displaying how much drivers were losing by sticking with Tuesdays. The latter had a more significant effect on increasing the hours that drivers scheduled during busy periods. So it's the same information, but the way that you present it, people respond to it very differently. So that's the framing effect. And this one is actually combined with the loss aversion bias, which is another tendency we have apparently we're more motivated to avoid loss than we are to lean into gains. Okay, and then here's the last one I'll share, the status quo bias. We have a preference for how things are. We're resistant to change, and we prefer not to take up the active stance of deliberation and reassess our options. So good examples of this are default options, privacy settings, whatever the default is, we just oftentimes tend to stay with that. Certain sort of financial plans or benefits, I'll talk a bit more about those. Auto queuing, when Netflix, plays the next episode without stopping, that's playing on our status quo bias. We don't stop to take up the active stance and deliberate, do we actually want to watch the next episode? We just go with what is. Another example that's often given is students sitting in the same seat every time. Okay, so when nudge theory came out, there was all this excitement because look, they've discovered human beings are limited beings. They can be irrational. They can do things that are against their own interests. So all we need to do, we don't need to introduce new economic incentives. We don't need to coerce them. We don't even need to make laws. All we need to do is to play around with their choice architecture. So these are two famous examples that the nudge theorists always give. So one, in 2006, Washington lawmakers decided to reform America's 401k system. Drawing insights from nudge theory, employers were encouraged to enroll workers automatically in the savings program. While everybody still had the right to opt out, this change in the decision environment, just playing with the default option, more than doubled participation from 42% to 91%. So that was by targeting the status quo bias. Over here, we have a movement in cafeterias at universities and schools and hospitals. Apparently, where you place the fruits and vegetables, the front of the line or at eye level, has an impact on whether or not people pick those healthier items for themselves. Okay, so here's Thaler and Sunstein. They're the economists who came up with this idea of the nudge. And they think, here's our ethical guidance that we need. A nudge must respect the freedom of choice of individuals. So it needs to be cheap and easy to avoid, and it needs to be transparent. And so this is why it's libertarian. It's respecting the freedom of the choice of the users. So, if you don't want to be in the 401k system or 401k savings program, you just opt out. And two, it needs to be in the best interest of those nudged. And that's how it's paternalistic. And then a sludge is going to be any case where it nudges people to make self-undermining choices. So a lot of those dark pattern examples that we talked about are going to be cases where, because it's against the interests of those being nudged, if those even count as a nudge, because it's not going to be nudge if it's coercing them or deceiving them. If it's pushing them in a direction to make a self-undermining choice, such as signing up for a subscription you never use, that's going to be a sludge. Okay, so what do you guys think about this case? Do you think that this is going to be a case that preserves the freedom of choice of individuals? Is it going to fit the criteria for libertarian paternalism? So it's probably going to preserve the freedom of choice, because the person can still click confirm, even though they're being prompted to cancel at a subconscious level. But what about the paternalistic part? Do you think it's in the interest of the people being nudged on the user end? Okay, because we are frightfully short on time, I'm going to plow through this. But I think, yeah, I would encourage, I should have asked you all to like take off your cameras so we could have like more of a discussion, get a discussion environment going. But I will just keep talking and listening to my own voice. So insofar as it's pushing you to cancel here, one might say it's going against the interests of the person being nudged, because they're trying to take their city off for a certain reason, maybe to protect their privacy or for whatever reason. Okay, but respecting others' autonomy gets a little more complicated once we bring nudging onto the scene. We can see how it becomes a little more complicated than just not coercing people or not deceiving people. So all of a sudden we have this idea of manipulation. Now remember, with nudges, a lot of times, now they're just alterations in the choice environment, but a lot of times what they're doing is they're targeting automatic parts of our psychology. And if you remember, automatic parts of our psychology are not fully conscious. So you're influencing someone by not engaging the conscious parts of their psychology, and certainly not the rational, reflective parts of our psychology that are usually govern clear-eyed choice, right? So now all of a sudden we have this new tool, which is manipulation, to worry about. So a kind of influence that does not sufficiently engage the capacities for reflective and deliberative choice is, in many cases, seems ethically problematic. So questions you could ask if you're implementing a nudge on your website, or you're framing information in a certain way, or using certain color schemes or whatever, or a choice context, is the influence, is the nudge, the way that you're trying to influence the user, happening behind their back? Is it targeting parts of their less than fully conscious psychology? Because in that case, it's not clear that they have a choice in the matter to reject that influence or to not. And is the nudgee sufficiently aware of this? So that's another tool for thinking through. Okay, because of time, I'm going to flip through these fairly quickly. I was going to open them up for discussion. But here's an interesting case of nudging, where it actually seems to activate the more reflective, deliberative part of the mind. And in that case, might be said to promote autonomy. So Twitter was interested in sending nudges and messages to those people who were posting something offensive. Of course, an algorithm is identifying this, which could lead to mischaracterization and false positives. But when the algorithm identifies that someone is posting something that looks like cyberbullying or hate speech, before the person tweets it, Twitter nudges them to say, "Are you sure?" And so it changes the decision environment in a way that the person still can post it, but all of a sudden they're being nudged to reflect. So it's an interesting case of a nudge. Here's an interesting case with this one. I still feel like the Duolingo one is just kind of brings up the complications of different forms of persuasion. So you might say that this is triggering our less than fully conscious psychology of like our emotions, and makes us feel sad for language bird. So is that manipulation? It's unclear. I think it's a debatable case, but possibly. Okay, I was going to ask you guys to think through this case. Actually, maybe I will, in hopes to get a voice out here besides my own. So here's the thing with chain restaurants, is that chain restaurants, the FDA requires now that you have nutritional information posted for the different options on your menu for chain. And I think it has to be 20 restaurants or more to your chain. However, things like DoorDash, food that's ordered through DoorDash and other, Uber Eats and these kind of things, they don't have the same regulations. And there's kind of a conversation going on right now about like, well, why isn't that the case? So let's say we required that DoorDash post all of its nutritional facts on its items. Do you think that this would promote autonomy? Or is it a type of influence that's more manipulative?
What exactly do you mean by autonomy? Is it like how quickly I decide to buy what I want to buy, or?
It's more making the choice on the website for DoorDash of posting the nutritional facts for the food items. And so the question is that nudge protecting the autonomy of the users, or is it trying to manipulate them?
I would say it depends. So let's say like I'm someone that actually cares about my calories.
Mm-hmm.
If I reach the point where I want to buy something, which is like I want to buy something that's out of my like diet. If I do actually want to buy that thing, I most likely already came to my mind already buying it. But then if I'm unsure and I see the calories, I would like it to give me a second or two to like think about it. And in that, I can obviously change my decision, obviously, or I can just go on and just actually still buy it. So yeah, it does affect it. But then I feel like it's not like it's telling you that you have to jog to like get the food now. It's not like something that drastic. So I still think that like it's giving a little nudge, but nothing that like major.
Yeah, great. So it seems to give us more information. And like you said, it makes you stop for a second before making your decision. So I think a lot of people would argue that it actually helps promote autonomy because it makes what might have been a less than fully conscious decision to just be like, I want this, I want this, I want this. It makes you think and reflect a bit more and have more ownership over your choices. Good, okay. So we're not going to analyze this because of we're short on time and I really got to get you guys through the stakeholder analysis for your homeworks. So here was something that hit the news everywhere. Apparently Uber uses a lot of nudges in their apps for their drivers. And why do they do that? Well, they have a problem facing their business model, which is that, the drivers are contractors, so they can work whenever they want, whatever hours, in whatever locations they want. But Uber also needs to provide, and Lyft has the same issue, needs to provide its service at all sorts of hours of the day in all sorts of areas, right? So in order to get its drivers to work at undesirable hours and at undesirable times, it started using nudge theory to design its app. And so it had all sorts of features in there. A forward dispatch feature, which works a lot like Netflix auto queue, where like before you're done with your first drive, your next drive starts queuing, and it's very difficult to turn this feature off. Gamification, so giving the drivers digital badges for driving, a certain amount of time or whatever. Or as you'll see in the middle here, giving them kind of frequently telling them they're only a certain amount of way from making an arbitrary sum of money, which has a psychological effect on us. And so it hit the presses, as in like, these apps are really creepy because they are trying to play psychological tricks on their drivers. And so I was going to have us analyze it, but I'll have you just think about it maybe tonight after class, if you guys want to chew on it in your own minds, just thinking through, is this manipulative? So remember, manipulation is influence that's happening behind the user's back in a way. Does it respect the autonomy of the drivers? So autonomy of the drivers involves them being able to make their own choices and being able to live their lives by the values that they want to live by. So you could start to give a more nuanced understanding of, are these apps really all that creepy? And if they are, how so, in terms of autonomy or manipulation? Okay, so we have 17 minutes, and I'm going to go into the value sensitive design stuff, because both of you, whether you're an undergrad or a graduate student, some of the value sensitive design stuff is going to come up on your assignment. So what is value sensitive design? So it's a theory and method that seeks to bring reflection on how values are implemented throughout the entire process of design, and how design itself can impact existing values. The aim is to bring reflection on values into the design of technology early on, and to continue it throughout the inception, development, and deployment of technology. So what does it mean to be value sensitive? When we say, what is the value of an iPad, we might immediately think of economic value, how much it costs. Or we might think of utility, like how useful it is for particular people. But human values include all sorts of things, from friendship, family, community, peace of mind, connection with nature, health, a sense of purpose, democracy, privacy. I mean, the list just goes on. So to design a piece of technology with value sensitivity is to make design choices, understanding how these choices in the design process or in the deployment of the technology, how they might support or inhibit certain values in the users, in the context in which it's deployed. Right. So it's what they call a tripartite iterative methodology, the VSD design methodology. And it's tripartite in that it involves three aspects: conceptual investigations, technical investigations, and empirical investigations. Each one is supposed to inform one another, and the process is iterative because it's not one step. You don't just go, step one, step two, step three, I'm done. But it's more like these are different lenses of analysis that you keep bringing to your piece of technology, and as you continue to deploy it. So we're not going to talk about all three in detail, but if you were to do a full VSD analysis of a website, you'd look at empirical matters, such as what is the social context in which I'm setting up this website? Who are the users that are going to be using it? What are their particular cultural and value commitments? You would look at existing practices. So this goes back to the Nissenbaum stuff of, if you're designing a medical website, thinking through what are the existing practices surrounding medical contexts, the particular informational norms and expectations that people have. You'd also look at who the stakeholders are, and we'll talk more about this, but anybody who stands to be benefited or harmed from the website. And what sort of values and interests are they bringing to it? So what sort of values might be inhibited, what sort of interests might be harmed by the website. Then one often needs to do a conceptual analysis. So if you're concerned about privacy and you want your website to respect the privacy of users, you should ask yourself, well, what is privacy? How do I understand that? And last week, hopefully we complicated that concept and thought a bit more deeply about it. Why does privacy matter? Or if you're caring about the autonomy of individuals, you want to think about what exactly autonomy is and when exactly is it compromised, which is a lot of what we did today, thinking through, okay, coercion violates autonomy. Deception violates. Well, does manipulation? See, that was all conceptual investigation to think about what's required of respecting the autonomy of users. But then the last part is the technical, when you think through the piece of technology itself and how different alterations to that piece of technology through design or whatever might inhibit certain values, promote certain values, and how you might be able to make alterations in that technology to overcome conflicts of values. Hopefully this will become clear. Okay, so the first thing you want to do, and this is prompted in, I think, the graduate students assignment, but maybe also undergrad, is you want to frame the technical work. So just get an idea of what are the values and aims of this website for you guys, or if you were doing a different piece of technology in a different class, you would just be that piece of technology. But what are the aims and values from the engineer designer stance? Oftentimes, it's profit, or you want to offer, a particular type of service, or you want to offer, be extremely efficient. There's all sorts of values that you bring to it as the designer. Then you want to situate the work within a social context. So what are the norms and expectations of the actual people who are going to be using the website? And so you want to think through those. I'm going to use as my example, I mentioned it last Thursday. It is a gambling app, and we talked about it in the context of privacy. So it's a gambling app, and it knows a lot about its users. It knows a lot about their financial history, their gambling habits, their online habits, and it has all sorts of predictive models to determine how much money they think that they can pump from various users. And then it uses personalized nudges to lure these users back to the app, okay? So that's the piece of technology we're thinking through. So the project values from the designer perspective might be profit. And maybe, they really want to produce an entertaining app. So maybe they care about entertainment. The social context would require some investigation. So how is gambling viewed in this particular context? Is there stigma with it? Is it viewed as just entertainment? What types of people gamble? What sort of socioeconomic demographics? You also want to look at what are the socioeconomic opportunities in this environment. Do most people have access to jobs? I mean, why would this matter? Because oftentimes gambling could be some sort of, Hail Mary of wanting to get money when other opportunities are not available to people. What does the economy look like in this particular environment? So all of these things might be relevant to thinking through the ethics of this particular piece of technology. Okay, good. 11 minutes. I'm so sorry this is rushed, you guys. So the stakeholder analysis. For a piece of technology, you want to ask who and what are the stakeholders? So anybody who stands to be benefited or harmed from, in your case, the website. What are their interests and values? So what are the things, in what way could they be harmed? Or in what way could they be benefited? And what are the values that they're bringing to the use of your website? Are their values or interests promoted or hindered by the technology? And then are those interests and values aligned or at odds with one another? So when you start doing really thorough stakeholder analysis, it'll oftentimes be there's just so many people who stand to be benefited or harmed from the technology. And a lot of times their interests can come into conflict with one another. And you, as someone who's designing technology, will want to mitigate some of these conflicts in the ways that you can. Sometimes you can't, but oftentimes there are alterations in your design that you can make to lessen conflict. Okay, so to give you a concrete example of a stakeholder analysis, here we have Skybet. Now, who are the stakeholders? We have the company, Skybet. We have the users over here. There are also all sorts of indirect stakeholders, which you'll want to think through in your own analysis. And these are people who aren't necessarily directly involved with the technology, but who could be harmed or benefited. So in this case, it could be families of users. It could be employers of users. It could be society as a whole. I mean, the list could get quite long once you start thinking through it. Okay, so you want to identify their interests or values that they're bringing to the technology. So with Skybet, they want profit. They probably want to retain customers to continue to make profit. And they probably want to comply with whatever the local legal restrictions are so that they can continue running their business. And then you have the user over here who, has the value of entertainment. I mean, why do we play around on the apps that we do? Oftentimes it's to have fun or entertain ourselves. It has an interest in privacy. And has an interest in autonomy or being able to govern his own life. Now, the list here could get much longer. Clearly his well-being is also here. There's all sorts of maybe some sort of value of trust, wanting to be able to trust, the apps that he's using, whatever. You could make quite a long list of interests and values, but for our example, we'll keep it short. And then one of the things that you want to do is think through if there's conflicts between these different stakeholders. So can anybody identify a conflict between the interests of Skybet and the interests of the users?
Skybet makes money when the user loses money.
Yep, great. Yep. So profit comes for Skybet at the loss of the user. Now, maybe, if the user is just doing it for entertainment, they're happy to pay a certain amount of money. But maybe once the money, gets to a large enough amount, we might say that it undermines their well-being or their financial health or some other interest they have. Good. What about other ones? So do you guys remember how Skybet worked? I gave the example of a guy who he lost tons of money on Skybet. And then he started to do an investigation of how much information Skybet had on him, and found out that they were sending him personalized nudges to get him back on the website based on that information.
Is it profit and privacy?
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, and I good. So I was going to go for privacy and retaining customers, because in that case, they're he got off the app and then they lured him back in using his personal data through predictive models. But you're right. Why do they want to retain customers? It's so that they can profit off of them and get more money. So yeah, absolutely. Good. Okay. So there's all sorts of conflicts that you can find here in terms of, with profit. Comes at the cost of possibly the autonomy of users if they have some sort of addictive tendency, and they're higher, the values they want to lead their life by might be, hey, I want to spend time with my family and I want to save money for these projects, whatever they be, and I have a gambling problem, and I'm spending my money on other things that Skybet is encouraging me to, and that can be at odds with his ability to govern his own life. And then you guys pointed out some of the other conflicts. Okay, so we're out of time, but what I was going to have you do is to think through these hypothetical, websites in either a social website platform or a finance platform, part of that thought experiment we did at the beginning. And to think through the stakeholders in that case. We're not going to have time to do that as a run through together. But it will be a part of your assignment for your own website. And so you'll want to think through, who are the stakeholders, who's using my website, who stands to be harmed, who stands to be benefited. And then part of the analysis is to list out those different stakeholders, their different interests that are at stake, and identify conflicts. Also, you'll want to think through just the website itself. Does it promote or hinder certain values, and how do those line up with the stakeholders? Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on to the last thing, since you will be asked to do that on your assignment?
Could you repeat that? I missed that, sorry.
So for your assignment on, I think whether it's the undergrad privacy policy, or so the graduate students need to do the privacy policy plus an analysis of their own website through the VSD lens. And some of the questions, and I'll post those assignments tonight, involve identifying the stakeholders for your website. So anybody who stands to be benefited or harmed by the use of your website, you'll want to list them. It could be the users, it could be the company it's serving, it could be indirect stakeholders that might be involved in some way. And then you'll list their values or interests that are at play. So just like we saw with Skybet, some of the interests and values at stake for the users are, they want access to entertainment, they have an interest in their own privacy being respected, they have an interest in remaining autonomous. And then on the other hand, Skybet is another stakeholder. They stand to be benefited or harmed by Skybet's success, is they care about profit, they care about retaining customers, they care about legal compliance. So you're going to do that with your own website. And I'm going to, I think, post on Canvas a guide for doing stakeholder analysis, but it's fairly, I mean, these are the basics and these are all you're going to be expected to be able to do. And you can also email me if you have any questions. So what we were going to do is run through a hypothetical scenario, but we don't have time for that. But I do want to say in the last 2 minutes, so undergrads and grads are going to be asked to write a privacy policy for your website. And what's important to keep in mind here are what is required for meaningful consent. So remember, we talked about this before. So consent is a way to respect the autonomy of users. So before taking their data, they need to be informed of all sorts of things. What data is going to be taken, what's going to be done with that data. Basically, for consent to be meaningful, it needs to be fully informative, but it also needs to be put in a way that the users can understand. So keep that in mind. And you're also going to have clear instructions with the prompt. But you'll want to also run through these sorts of questions, which we did with the activity number 1, thinking through what sort of data are you collecting on your website? How are you collecting it? Why are you collecting it? Who will have access to it? How are you protecting it, storing it? And what control do users have over their data? And this will be really helpful to reflect back on the Helen Nissenbaum stuff. So think about what sort of, when people use your website, what sort of values are they bringing to it? What sort of expectations are they bringing to it? And are the way that you're using data and collecting data, is it in line with those values and expectations? So that'll really help guide your thinking through, these different questions about what you're doing with your data. And it will all be described in the prompt, and it all just draws from stuff in the lecture. But I will post the slides, the assignments I'll post tonight. And then if anybody needs to email me or has any questions, I can be available to meet by Zoom or just via email. But does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So when you said indirect stakeholders, so like, let's say in the situation we described it, can an indirect stakeholder be like the bank? Because obviously the people that use the bank obviously will put more money into the bank, or like people will pay their rent. Like how like diverse or like how broad should this like indirect stakeholder be? Because it seems very, very like infinite-ish.
Yeah, good. So the line between direct and indirect is very fuzzy. And there's a lot of debate about that. So my guidance to you would be, so first just think about like the people using the website or the people profiting or designing the website as the direct stakeholders. Indirect are going to be people who their interests noticeably stand to be benefited or harmed. So if it is the case that the bank is like, their practices are going to have to shift in some way, or they're going to take a loss, a financial loss, they're definitely indirect stakeholders. But if they just kind of keep running on as they were running on before, then they're not a stakeholder because they're not being benefited or harmed in any particular way. But yeah, indirect stakeholders can get really very lengthy, the list. So for your assignment, you just want to list a few of them. You don't have to like figure out every single person in the world who stands to possibly be affected by it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
A quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Would the developers of the website be considered direct or indirect stakeholders?
Direct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, anybody who is developing the technology is a direct.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, guys, unless there's any other questions, I'll release people. I'll post everything on Canvas. Do not hesitate to reach out to me by email. And if enough people reach out, like I'm more than happy to set up an office hour or whatever to walk through assignments. But I have a feeling you guys will be good at it, but do reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
I'm really sorry. I just have one quick question. Do Professor Jose conduct his office hours today, like after this class? I mean,
So I don't know, but I know that he was picking up his daughter from the airport, and that's why he left.
Okay, okay.
So my guess, even though I have no idea about the course stuff, logistics, my guess.
No, sure.
Airport.
But thank you for the information. Thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye.